Maria's question, and then maybe you can throw it over to me. I will speak a little bit on having worked within public administrations or supporting public administrations using both trainings and the actual practices in their work in Sweden, and in particular in Vorarlberg in Austria, where I have some stories. But maybe and then we can weave a little bit back and forth and draw out some essences. But what do you think, Mathieu? You want to start?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. And let's I'd rather try and be succinct so that we can also see what lands with all of you and what seems to be helpful and what you want to deepen as we go along. So, so to start, I mean, maybe indeed it sounds like a practical question, but I think I do need to start from the original inspiration for bringing in participatory leadership into the Commission, because that's what explains how the work has developed. And on this, to keep it in a nutshell, there were basically the meeting of three strands in our context. One is we had a manager who was my head of unit in 2005, 2006, who was really wondering or noticing that there was an issue with the leadership and management training. The way they were organized were not at the Commission, and although they were offered to all managers at the time at the Commission, middle, senior managers, were not conducive to fostering what, in his view, would be real, engaging leadership, or leadership that fosters the kind of engagement inside the organization, but also with stakeholders, as we like to call them, outside. And so he was looking for what could be models, practices, training modalities that would help to open up that kind of leadership there. So that was one strand. A second strand in the organization, because you were talking about needs, there was a growing awareness that within our very hierarchical, very bureaucratic, very procedure-based organization, institution, at the heart of the European democratic process, with the pressure of all the accountability put on our institution, we had started to organize ourselves in more and more rigid manners, meaning the levels of control were really had become very, very strong in terms of financial management, in terms of staff, human resources management. And so there were more and more systems that were actually putting additional layers of control compared to what had happened before. There's a historic reason to this. The resignation of a certain college of commissioners before, that kind of instilled a sort of a trauma inside the institution. But there was a growing awareness that in response, or I would say these additional layers of control, were actually not helping us to collaborate. And the big word at the time, it's still present 10 years down the line, or even more, was breaking the silos. So how do we work across the departments around the cross-cutting challenges, around the big initiatives, around stakeholder or citizens engagement, etc. And then the third strand was kind of meeting in response to those needs, was basically a set of us starting to scout for the kind of practices, the kind of training, the kind of worldviews, mindset models that could actually help to instill inside our institution, with everything I described, the sort of practices, leadership practices that would actually make a concrete difference. So not training people on, and managers in particular, on models that they cannot take back into their context, but actually some very practical approaches that would help managers and leaders in our context to actually get better and more skillful at engaging their staff, at clarifying purpose, at working with citizens, with stakeholders outside, in more generative manner, in more efficient manners as well, because there was starting to be a growing pressure on our resources. And in a course around 2011, for the first time, our institution stopped growing in resources and we started shrinking, which was a really big novelty to adapt to and kind of triggered something. although it remained quite limited. So that was the starting point. And those of us who were scouting for those practices really encountered a number of them. For me, I know in my personal journey, it was mind mapping initially, like that really made a click. But also that puts me in contact with people like Helen Tichenbeeth and Rainer von der Prechting and Tolker and other people inside and outside the organization, because more and more people were looking for these ways of bringing those practical approaches that would make a difference in our context. And it really started off from small experiments. We had a big learning day that Tolker was part of, together with me and a few others, where we experimented with first World Cafe sessions, and which landed really well with some people, the ones who were really hungry for more collaboration, and which landed really badly with those who actually loved the experts on the stage and loved to know who was managing the room and things like this. So it kind of, the very first experiment showed us this divide, this cultural divide between sort of mainstream top-down culture and then the more cross-cutting, collaborative, open, transparent ways of sharing knowledge, of thinking together, etc. So I've just given you this bit of context because somehow what I've heard from you, this trembling, was ever more present in every time that we were experimenting with anything in our context, because bringing in intense collaboration levels was challenging enough in itself. But on top of this, we made our life pretty difficult by bringing a lot of the decorum, a lot of talking pieces, a lot of meditation cautions, a lot of out of care and generosity, but we were totally blind to the actual organizational context that we were bringing that into. And so we had to learn the hard way somehow on how do you bring participatory practices in this context, which is not forgiving for anything that looks fluffy, that looks cultish, that looks too colorful, that looks too initially. So we had to adjust massively to the context. And that, I mean, there were some harsh moments there, some harsh learning points in that, but it's completely fine because it was just the way the context was telling us there is great potential because many people were seeing potential, but there are a lot of attention points. So you're bringing this into this context, not into any others. So if I fast track where we are now, from the initial experiments, the initial trainings, senior management seminars, any sorts of meetings, some communities of practice that were hosted around different practices. One was strategic planning and programming, for example, were really hosted in participatory ways, and people were forging their learning as they went along. But where the practice is going now, 10 years after or 12 years after this very first seeds and experiment, is it's being used more and more and recognized as, first of all, 3 years ago, the practice got an award for the initiative that had the best overall impact on internal communication and staff engagement. For example, because a lot of the processes were internal processes. So when I hear you're looking for how to improve the quality of your meetings, for example, make them more human, more listening based, etc. That has taken an enormous lot of forms in our context, from team meetings that people are hosting using a talking piece in a circle. I'm not saying that everybody in the commission is working like that, by the way, I just want to say that. We still have a lot of coexisting very different cultures, okay? So, but a lot of meetings, internal meetings, are run more and more in this way because people are seeing it helps us to think more together, it helps us to create more results. The quality of our reports, very formal reports, can be enriched. The quality of our decisions can be enriched and fast-tracked, actually, from having really consulted people internally well. A lot of team days, team events, directorate days, whole department events have been hosted, designed in participatory ways by people who trained with us, who build their capacities, people we have mentored or worked with more and more. And in this, the combination of all of this is actually leading to more and more kind of whole systems change initiatives that are either really hosted in participatory ways or that are boosted by some points of really good quality participatory processes that have been created. We're in a process, for example, at the Commission of, they call this synergies and efficiencies, and there was a big process of somehow re-centralizing of all the human resources people. And that was a massive change compared to a decentralized model before in all the Directorate General services, all the departments. So it was moving hundreds of people in the organization just to help them make sense of this change, seeing the potential of it, seeing how to work more efficiently together through this change, was actually hosted through dedicated workshops at certain points of this big change initiative. And then I would say the third type of, so from day-to-day meetings to internal processes, going more and more to significant change initiatives, culture change initiatives, different kinds of aspects. There's also been, right from the start, the dedication from some of us and a growing number of people to actually bring those practices in hosting the events with external stakeholders, so external to our institution. So I think that will resonate with what you're looking for working better with citizens. Now, the reality of the European institutions is that they are much less in direct contact with, I would say, the ordinary citizens, and there's nothing negative about this in my language, but we are more in touch with the representative organizations, whether national, local organizations, NGOs, civil societies. So we tend to be in contact with not, I would say, the ultimate citizens, but really the intermediate layers. But even in how we engage with these people, there are more and more, not just from the Commission, but more and more from other institutions which have been somehow influenced or impacted or inspired to work in more participatory ways, to run their engagement processes with the outside world in this kind of ways. Different levels of qualities, different levels of inspiration, different use of the harvest, of the results afterwards. We're still struggling quite often with the mainstream political culture, which tends to try and want to know what the results will be even before process has taken place. So I loved what you said, Carlos, before. You know, you actually don't know what this is, you don't know what will emerge, so you have all the questions. Well, that's a kind of spirit and mindset we're trying to foster, but it clashes with a lot of control-based and predictability patterns in our institutions as well, which is normal, and which I just want to go back to one thing I said before, which does come from the pressure on us needing to be accountable to citizens, member states, and all. So, yeah. So I want to stop here, but I hope I'm covering some things that have some value for you.
What, well, maybe to Paz and Javier and Carlos, just a little bit more clarity. So you're doing a training, your institution, is that a municipality leadership? Is it a university institution? I don't know enough, so maybe just a couple of lines of, and who is coming to the training? Who are you inviting? Is it just internal, or are you inviting citizens and groups? So could you just clarify that a little bit? Then I would share a little bit and try to build on what already has been offered by Matthew.
Yeah, I think it's internal training. It's for the regional government, the administration of the regional government, and we do internal training for the civil servants of our administration, all citizens. It's not in our competence trying to citizens. But now we are doing some new things that we start to use some work with citizens, but our
Mandate.
competences are for training for civil servants, only civil servants.
Very good. Thank you.
Just to explain, Tucker, it might be helpful that the people there have identified acupuncture points of people who are already willing and wanting to learn and have the potential to take this further. And they're both from within the IYAP, which is the institute part that deals with the civil servants recruitment and support and training, but also from their partner organisations that they've worked with as well, so health and social care in the regional government. But there'll be people who will be invited because they've seen that there's a potential there for them to form a network. So, peace.
Thank you. So besides having been part, as Matthew already mentioned, been part of the initial invitation to begin this experiment in the European Commission, the couple of examples I will offer you, and I'm happy even after this call if you want to put you in contact with some of these people, but because there's a lot to learn. So I will quickly share the context of those two stories, and then you can identify what you would like more of. And then I would also want to offer just maybe a couple of essences of where to be careful on your journey as this grows with your own practice and in the strategic context that you're in as a regional authority. So the first a quick story is in Sweden 5 years ago, the government passed a policy that began to influence a lot of things that had not happened earlier in Sweden. This policy basically was a majority decision in Swedish government saying from now on, all public servants, both politicians and administrative servants, shall co-create the future of Sweden with the citizens. Now, this is policy in the Swedish parliament, but the civil servants began to tremble because many of them didn't know how. It's a nice thing to be told by the politicians that you have to engage and create innovative sharing with 10 million people the citizens of Sweden, but many have been sitting in offices not knowing how to engage and also being quite afraid of the input of citizens. So not just the public servants, but also the citizens. We have not exercised this collaborative citizen influencing kind of way of working. And it seems a little bit similar to what you were beginning to step onto. So a person in the municipality or association in Stockholm came to an art of hosting training. She's called Anna-Karin, and I'd be happy to put you in contact with her. She might be a very interesting eagle for you to have. And I'm happy to host a call with you guys and her later on if you find this interesting. She came to an art of hosting training we had in Denmark. She had no idea. We didn't know who she was. She works in the financial department of the new municipality association, which is the operating arm of the Swedish government towards all regions and all municipalities across Sweden. And she was, like Mathieu was mentioning, they were looking also for, are there ways and practices and leadership practices that exist that we could train in, so we could begin to actually, in a serious, conscious, and useful way, engage with the citizens to begin to co-create the future of Sweden and the social structures within Sweden and bring them up to another level. So it's a fantastic mandate. There's something happening similar in Scotland, but this is in anywhere in the world I've been working. This is, such a mandate. And so she contacted us. She said, I want to learn how I can do this. So similar to you guys go to a training. And there's many of my colleagues who have worked with the local politicians and municipal and regional politicians, administrative leaders, but we have no idea of how to create fruitful collaboration that would lead to making the social fabric work even better than it has. And so we started with a little introduction workshop. Then we did 50 people came. Out of this, 40 signed up for the first training, similar to you have yours. And they were all in the strategic decision we made. We will not yet engage with so-called citizens who are not working in the public sector. So only people in the public sector, similar to what I understand your context is, because they themselves needed to be starting, maybe from afresh and exercise another way of collaborating. And also that would, create a field of newness and also some trembling and some vulnerability. We did 3 trainings, one every year. And each of them, those who caught on to it, began to apprentice with us in the next trainings, similar to what we did in the commission, is we build capacity to build capacity. Like you have been to a training, some of you, now you're on the team to create a training. It's a very wise way of creating sustainability and not depending on experts and consultants. Because one of the key things I think we have learned working in this fashion and also training other people in it is that the more people who can practice, the easier it gets. And some would be practicing harvesting, some are good in designing, some hold the strategic picture, some can mandate, But if everybody it becomes a network of practitioners within, which is what we started very early on in the commission, and now that network is alive and thriving. So in this case, these trainings, and it was fabulous to see how these public servants, the first one was only administrative leaders. Some of them were people Anna Karen's colleagues. They learned, they became apprentices with us, and then they began to practice. Next day, back in the offices, a year later, they had practiced a lot. Then people that they were working with, local politicians began to come to these trainings. We had never seen that before. Usually it was internal consultants or middle managers or some, but politicians began to experiment with this because they saw how these administrative leaders began to approach them and be able to create more conversational, meaningful conversation that would lead to results with real work that they had to do, to activate the policies both locally and also nationally. So it's very interesting. And then they began to request if we could create meetings with mayors and city directors, the 2 key decision makers in the hierarchy of any region or any municipality. And we didn't know they would come. One of the colleagues of Anna Karin had for 20 years worked with top politicians in Sweden, both locally and nationally, and is very respected amongst the politicians. And she approached us and said, can we work together and try to create this experiment to bring strategically bring mayors and city directors as a pair to a 2-day participatory leadership art of hosting practice field. We weren't training them to do it. We were giving them a space in which they could work with the issues that they are meeting in their municipalities and be together as a pair. So only people who were they could only come as a pair and 2 from each municipality. Very interestingly, from several regions and also 20 cities were represented, big and small from across. And the first couple of hours, they thought it was pretty weird to sit in a circle and say why you had come, and like a check-in. But 1.5 hours later, they began to relax. And in the end, they were asking us to do more of this. They created their own network. They had never had 2 days together in that kind of intimate, both humane space, and then focusing and surfacing with other colleagues from other cities. What were the issues? And some of them were, of course, the same in different cities, and some were different, but suddenly becoming a wisdom council for each other. Now this is rippling out. They're running their own trainings now, and they're also beginning to do research and evaluation on this. So, this has been 6 years down the line. So if that would be interesting to you as you proceed with the strategic direction of not just the training in March, but if this seems to be useful for you and your colleagues, then there's a contact to both Lena and Anna Karin that I'll be very happy to make for you and initiate that as learning partners. I'll draw out a couple of essences of learnings from both in the Commission and here in Sweden. And I think it's general tent poles or pillars of what to, you could say essences. First of all, these practices are both personal and collective. So if you begin to practice it yourself, you own the right to begin to invite other people into it. It doesn't mean that you disregard the hierarchy. Hierarchy is a good thing if it's led well, but this is a dance between the circle and the hierarchy. And it's, top down and bottom up needs to collaborate. If you look at history, if it's just top down, it just becomes a dictatorship or over controlling. If it's just bottom up, it becomes mobs with no direction. So I think you are in that position, and this is where some of the learnings that some of us have had might be useful, and you will make your own. But remember, if you can practice it a little bit yourself, even make that meeting a little bit better. Prepare it better. So work together to create a little design. Bring some harvest out of it. Build on the harvest. I would rather suggest to have less meetings and more powerful meetings. And this can be used, the world will change by each meeting rising in quality. The Danish Queen said many years ago to us when she spoke in the New Year's Eve to the Danish people, this fabulous insight. She asked us the question to ponder. She said, what if all the disharmony, the wars and conflicts in the world are because of the conversations that never took place? What are those conversations? And who is willing and ready to host them? Those is what, we're not just talking about participatory leadership and art of hosting is a frivolous thing. For what? For what matters? For what is needed now in the world, in the municipality, in your institution. Focus on what matters and make it work. Other essences, the combination of 3 threads like a DNA. One is building capacity for yourselves and other people to practice individually and together. That's what you're doing now in March. Second, and actually in the Commission, if you remember, Matthew, the trainings didn't happen before we had been, doing a couple of strategic conversations from the Joint Research Center. You were there, remember? We did from the translation department. So make it work in practice. And not just to show the methodologies or, try to show that art of hosting or participatory leadership is very fantastic. Stay away from the hype. Work with what matters. If there is work you need to have done, that could be done better together because it's complex. It's not just, complicated, but it's complex. It needs the collective intelligence, the collective wisdom, the collective experience to be released in a sharing format, as you were saying, Javier. Make it work. And I think we were tested quite heavily by some of the leaders in the European Commission, and the same also in Sweden, to see if we could actually make strategic conversations in this manner that led to real results that were useful. And when that happened, then people began to mandate more trainings. And so the capacity to build capacity and doing the work and show it that it works needs to be evolving if you want to continue this journey, evolving in harmony, in the progression over year 2, 3, 4 years. And then, so one thing is to build capacity for people so the third thread is building capacity for those of you who want to hold the core of this on a strategic, useful level. Like I can hear you're seeking of how could this be useful internally, and how could it then begin to move towards building more citizenship with your citizens. And there will be a time to begin to move in that direction, but you need to build your own capacity to build more capacity. And it sounds a little like use of words, but I hope you get my meaning. So one thing is you train other people, but you also need to train people who can train other people. And not everybody needs to be very sophisticated. Those of us who are doing this professionally or have, has it as a job. But it's actually really simple, but very powerful if you do it right. I mean, I have worked with people with more power that maybe was good for them. And I sat them in circle and had them check in and then, look at what are we really needing to obtain here, and create a listening field with them. And then afterwards, people have said, my God, we got good results, but more importantly, we became more human together. And this is, I think, it's not just to focus on the humanity and the feel good and the energy of group energy. What is that for? It is so that we may act more wisely together, spend our money more wisely, be more conscious. Remember, the HR director of the Joint Research Center in the European Commission, I remember him in a check-in circle, and I think you were there, Mathieu. I asked a check-in question of, why have you come today to learn more about participatory leadership in service of the citizens of Europe? And he said, I have come because I am tired of leading by fear. I want to learn how to lead by trust. And I've seen that working in these very simple ways, holding it from our human self, our human leadership capacity, that becomes possible as we work together on real things. So there's a lot of possibilities, and I think maybe I'll stop there just to mention that one of the places in Europe, and if you are interested in more, you can let me know, but in the local authority, regional authority in Bregenz, in Vorarlberg in Austria, for 25 years, they have worked with citizen engagement. And they have made all the mistakes, and they have also begun to crystallize some real essences. And this is the local government, parliament, the governor, and a little office they have created. It might be similar to who you are in your context. It's called Office for Future Related Questions. And the story of how that has developed is a very useful and powerful example of what is actually possible. If you don't go slowly, you go carefully, and you keep practicing yourself what you want other people to practice. And the guy who led this for 25 years has just stepped back. He's called Manfred Helrich, but he's become a very good friend of mine. And I have a little video of him presenting their learnings over 25 years to local authorities and regional leaders at a conference on democracy hosted by Anna Karin and the Association for Municipal Leadership in Stockholm a few years ago. And I was there, and I just taped it on my iPhone, and I had permission to use it. But from that, I'll just say, one of the things that is really important around engagement is, yes, you can create these conditions for learning and sharing to occur, which is what the art of hosting does pretty well, and other forms of methodology certainly also. This is not the only way kind of thing. It can create innovation or emergence. Something new and better arises out of the work of the group if you harvest it well and stay sincere about it and don't be flippant about it. But the other thing, and they have learned this over the in Vorarlberg, their purpose was to engage citizens and work together with citizens in order to create resilience and self-organizing, to release the self-organizing power of people. And I think many engagement processes around the world is not focusing on the last piece. And so I think that, there is conditions for how you allow self-organizing to arise. And certainly some of the principles and deeper understandings of art of hosting can release that. But keep that in mind. Engagement is for releasing the self-organizing power of people, whether it's in your own organizations between you, but there need to be a clear collective purpose, and there needs to be a field for the learning to rise up and create a better and simpler way of organizing and working together. And if those things come together, it's really hopeful, and certainly getting there. It's an effort, but it's also a joy, and yeah, I think I will stop there. Hopefully that was useful. Pieces back. Happy to take any questions or any deepening if we have time for it, for both for me and Mathieu, if you have.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Kind of the risk of cutting us short, which I also wish we were sitting around a table in Sevilla with some tapas and a big jug of wine, and we could probably keep going all night, really. I just wanted to also offer to Mathieu, you mentioned some principles too for starting off that I think could be useful. We've literally 10 minutes left, but I just wanted to kind of offer a little bit of that space, and also to follow up on what you said, Toke, about linking to people, because I have a feeling there's a call here between people who are working in public administrations to actually share some knowledge now. It's probably time to start doing some harvesting that would be really good to think of. But just wanting to just pass that back to Mathieu a little bit, and then maybe we check out and think about what next. I think there's this is not the end, this is kind of the start, really. So yeah, pieces back.
Yeah, and thank you, Linda. As you just spoke that, I'm thinking of somebody else you might actually want or be interested at some point to connect with. It's a colleague of ours working in the Director General for Research, and she's really working with the OECD on innovation in public administration. And so the OECD has led quite a significant piece of work around innovation in public sector. And it's a 3-year project now, research project, and so it might be interesting in case you want to link up with them as well. Because there is a bigger picture to what we're talking about in any more local context, to whether a region or an institution, and it's really what makes it fascinating is those interlinkages. And for me, one of the key principles that I would like to offer is really be aware of the quality of the start, because it determines everything else somehow. So there's something of a tenderness in the starting point. You were talking about the trembling, you can feel it in your own guts, in your own system somehow, but there's a tenderness to that. And there's a vulnerability as well. It's a little bit like you were talking about a seed, Linda. When the seed starts to emerge, to sprout, there's really a need to protect what you have planted as it starts to grow and come out. Why? Because, and it might be less strong in your context than it certainly was in ours, but a lot of people actually don't appreciate so much to be disrupted by innovation. So some people will want to smash the seed back into the ground so that it doesn't come to life so much, it doesn't release its potential. So I'd like to invite or to draw your attention on the need to also protect that which you care so much about, that you're investing so much of your life and resources into as well. Which links to a second principle, which is that's fundamentally linked to any kind of innovation, but it's be prepared to hold the tensions around not just the beginning, but throughout. And the tensions within yourself, within your team, is somehow, the going can get rough because people might start to respond or anything. So recognizing when tension strikes in whatever form it takes, in form of disturbance, in the form of fights, in the form of feedback, in the form of any form it takes, these are signs of whatever you're doing is doing something. So be curious about that, about these tension points, which might express or which might come your way, not in the most pleasant of ways, sometimes. For me, it's at the heart of it, and it's what makes the work actually real, so that it's not too consensual as well. Tension is part of the work. One factor which I'd like to echo, some of what Toke has said, is stay in community, stay connected through that. It's not alone that you can hold the potential and you can hold the vibration that you are also generating or inviting. So stay connected, stay curious about the learning, really be intentional about your learning spaces as a community. Around your training, I'm seeing that no doubt you have 7 weeks to go. Wow, what a luxury. Those days when I have 4 weeks before training or any process, I'm actually the happiest of man. But stay connected even afterwards. Really be intentional. Put this into your calendars. Have some dedicated learning points. I know in my context, in our context in the Commission, what is crucially lacking in our culture is a culture of learning. We jump from one process to another, and we don't sit and take the time to really learn, to really distill what we have seen, our sense of what's been. Because these are the places where we can track what's happening. For me, that's an essential principle, is are we tracking what is happening as a result of what we've hosted? And I gave you the sort of few minutes version of the developments in our context and in many forms, and maybe a sense of the scale. But we have organized by now 60 trainings. It's even beyond, because now people are starting to organize trainings on their own. Sometimes they care to ask for advice on how would you go about this, but so they just go their way, which is beautiful to see. But we are 60 trainings on the way, 2,000 people trained, and the field of practice morphs on its own. It takes its own life. So one principle for me, and I really honor Toke for having been a good mentor in this, is also do not get attached to what needs to happen, but really get curious about what is happening. And then I guess maybe two more things. For me, part of the art is looking for what is possible in the moment. And it's really dropping from our head about what should be happening, but really looking for what is possible and being very practical. Let's talk about saying, what if any meeting would help to create more trust, more relationships, more. Look for those points in whichever context. And I think maybe the last one to really leave you with is there's something about just be patient with the work, be patient with the learning, tend to your own learning individually as well, but be patient. It's persevere all the time. Stay with what's happening and learn from this, and don't overplan, don't overwant. But really be present to what's happening on the way. And for me, this is where the true joy of that work is actually coming, and which is fueling me with a constantly renewed energy, although my own life has gone its journey with the organizational or the path of the practice as well. So yeah, thank you for that space.
I'm going to just stop the recording.